And now it's time for the sponsor perspective portion of our program. Before we get going, a quick clarification. While I'm connecting these interviews, and the questions are mine, like really mine, I don't even know, these are going to be zingers. The content of this portion of the event shouldn't be considered editorial. We really appreciate Nokia's support of the program today. With that, I'd like to welcome Grace Koh, the newly named Vice President of Legislative Affairs at Nokia. Grace, it's great to have you. Let me just throw my first zinger at you, Grace. We've been talking about this question of how you lure solid, thoughtful, motivated, public-interested people back into the federal workforce. But I don't want this to be a kumbaya discussion, right? What are the complexities of that? You've been in and out of this. You've been an ambassador. You've worked in the halls of Congress. You know the different dimensions. How do you make that a rich environment as opposed to a bland one? How do you get people in that environment to take risks and to do cool and innovative and different things if things aren't working? In other words, I do want federal government to be solid, whatever, but I also worry about things going stale. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Steve, for that question. This program is going just so much better than I could even have imagined. It's such an important topic, and it's so necessary right now here at the transition. We're looking at a draining of the expertise here in the federal government. A lot of people have resigned or retired during the past 4 years. And we definitely need to rebuild that expertise again, especially right now as we're transitioning from one government to the next. We've got to carry on. How do we bring people in to build that expertise? It's almost the same with any other work environment. You provide a stable, predictable workplace where I think your ideas are appreciated and heard. And I can talk a little bit just simply to the things that drew me to government service. I had worked in the private sector for some time before I actually joined the staff on the Hill. And it was a real desire to understand how the policymaking happens. And it was a real desire to understand sort of the complexities of federal service. Anyone who works in the policy space at all would benefit from time in the government. And you have the added sort of rush, I guess, of actually working for the American people. There's nothing like actually being able to say, I'm representing the United States of America in a treaty negotiation, or even very simply, you're representing the interests of a specific population or community in the negotiations over a bill, or in any such situation. You have access to information. People are so willing to work with you and educate you when you are part of the federal government. It's an experience like no other. But as in any other work environment, if you don't have the freedom, the backing, the support of your politicals, all of that, if that's not there, then it makes it so much harder to do your job. And it makes it so much harder to actually succeed at what you want to do personally for your own growth, but also in terms of what you think is the right way to proceed on the course of policy.
I can feel the passion, just as you talked about, being an ambassador, representing the government, doing this. And as I just mentioned, Andy Card, most people I know like you, or, your colleague, Brian Hendricks. I mean, I'll just be honest. Brian Hendricks is an obsessive compulsive about getting connectivity, right? It's like he can't help but talk about that. And so, part of that is, I'm just wondering, right now when we have a deficit of those people, that's where we are today. So part of it is getting them back in. Are there other things that we're not thinking about, at least for that? I mean, I know firms are self-interested. Let's just be honest. Firms are self-interested. But is there a commons? Is there a partnership? Is there a safe zone that can be created in this time where, like on broadband connectivity in the country, which, given the COVID crisis, we've got to solve. We've got to solve the education problem, the last mile problem. And as Brian has taught me over and over again, your colleague, we failed in that for now decades. So I think the question is, how do you bring people back, but also how do you unleash some creative new ideas? Do you have any thoughts on how to create that safe space when we don't have all the people in government that we may need right now?
Absolutely. I think the United States is so unique in partnering with the private industry in a way that I think no other government ever has done before. Or I just don't think that the same sort of partnerships are available in many other countries. first of all, I'd like to address the question of the revolving door. I know DC is always sort of vilified for being a swamp where people just go in and out of government and then reap the benefits. There's some truth to that, obviously, but there's also a lot of a benefit that comes out of the expertise that comes from going back and forth within private sector and the public sector. And believe it or not, a lot of people are actually interested in doing the best they can in order to move a policy initiative forward, either from the private sector or from the political or from the government side. And I think it's in the United States' best interest to take advantage of that desire to serve. So to bring the expertise from the private sector into the government to serve, or to take that expertise from the government and seed it out into the private sector. This is why I have gone back and forth between the private sector and the government, because I have really, I think that it's really incredibly important, I think, to be able to take what you learn from each side and spread it throughout the other environment, so that there is a better understanding, so that both sides can mesh together and work together very well. I think there's been some really interesting partnerships when it comes to cybersecurity, for example. Cybersecurity has been able to take advantage of and there's still a long way to go, obviously, but they've been able to take advantage of, I think, things like the NIST Cybersecurity Center for Excellence. They've been able to work. There's an FBI sort of coordinated cybersecurity center as well that takes advantage of the expertise in the private sector and also marries it with the information from the government and sort of tries to conduct real world cyber operations and also make policy from that. That sort of intermarriage can be really, really beneficial and also supplements, I think, supplements, I think, the lack of resources sometimes that comes in the government. But that kind of intermingling with, obviously, useful guardrails that keep us from, succumbing to our worst tendencies.
Right.
Would be very helpful, I think, in moving things forward. I'd love to see more of that. In fact, I was just listening to a great Planet Money podcast about how Taiwan was able to do crowdsourced applications, what their sort of public interest hackers were calling forking the government. It's really fascinating, actually, to be able to get that expertise from the private sector into government service.
So, Grace, let me ask you just two questions. We're nearly out of time, but I want to get, so one very short question, because I've got a kind of a question that'll, an uncomfortable question for you to end with. But the quick question is, when we see the stories of Russian hacking, you mentioned cybersecurity, various cybersecurity initiatives. Do you think, just in your gut, do you feel this nation and the government are going to get to a point where the cybersecurity standard we have is less penetrable? It's become a constant theme in all our discussions right now that in this country, with the big companies we have, we're seeing hacks after hacks after hacks. Is this issue going to go away and get solved? Yes or no?
Yes or no? Yes or no question like that, Steve. That's a real poser. Okay.
Maybe.
You are the moderator. We're always going to be working towards improving that situation. I think we are always going to be working towards getting more people into the government that can help us figure out how to move faster, how to defend against the adversary. So that's
maybe with work.
That's what we need
that's
people
a
here
fair
to do.
answer.
That is why we need to support that federal staff.
So here's the question you're going to be irritated by. If you had Grace Ko in government, Ambassador Grace Ko, talking to Grace Ko at Nokia, what would you really want that Grace Ko to understand that she didn't get? And likewise, what does Grace Ko in Nokia really want to tell that Grace Ko in government that she's just not getting?
That's entertaining. Oh, wow. There are so many things that I'd want to tell myself. Look, Grace Ko at Nokia, you have to understand that there are a number of things that government is going to be concerned about that isn't going to be necessarily about efficiency. It's not going to be about the quickest bottom line, and that those things are going to move forward regardless. And Grace Ko at Nokia wants the federal government to understand that that the companies are willing to work with you. Companies are willing to work to support the initiatives and the ultimate goals that the policymaker has. let's do this in a way that is that works with the government, takes the incentives that are in industry and actually moves them in line with creates the incentive for the companies to actually support what the government is doing, so that we can all sort of be working together in lockstep.
Well, both sides of the Grace Co., I mean, you can come back together now. I just want to say thank you, because it's not often you find an underwriter or a supporter that says, let's just talk about how we get back to good government. That's how we get back to getting good policy expertise in place and look at that environment and ecosystem. So I want to thank you very much. I want to thank Grace Co. I want to thank Nokia for your time today and supporting today's program.
Thank you, Steve.